I love Jimmy Darts. He's the best. Notice their response to the way, like their immediate response when he says, here's a gift. No way. Is this a joke? This can't be serious. I can't accept this. This can't be real, right? Open up your Bibles if you got them to Luke 24. We're going to look, like Justin just read, in a couple of these, but look specifically at verse 41. Luke 24 and verse 41. Michelle, if we've got it on the slide, that'd be helpful. I think this is the key verse to the whole passage that we're going to study. It says, and while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling. While they still disbelieved for joy. That's an odd phrase, right? Disbelieved for joy. Commentators agree that the most simple way to explain what's happening there is they thought it was too good to be true. One commentator said that their crazy joy became an impediment to faith. And so you're picturing this disbelief for joy in like those Jimmy Dart videos where these people are going, Norma, in the beginning, I can't accept it. This isn't real. There's no way. Or the guy, are you serious? Are you serious? That's kind of the reality. And so friends, when we grasp the gravity of the gospel, the most natural conclusion we can have is it's too good to be true. It's too good to be true. Like, there's no way. I can't accept that. Is this a joke? You can't be serious. All I need to do to be saved is believe in Jesus. I don't have to do a bunch of religious stuff. And with all my brokenness and with all my baggage, the God of the universe wants me and his family forever. I can't lose my faith. You won't let me go. I'm going to spend billions of years in eternity based off what someone else did for me that I couldn't do. That's too good to be true. See, on one hand, for my friends in the room, if you believe in the gospel and you don't think it's too good to be true, you don't know the gospel. And I'm praying that this morning would reawaken your eyes and your mind and your heart and your soul to how crazy what Jesus did for you is. And on the other hand, I want to reframe the doubt that you and I all struggle with. Like the very subtle, kind of sneaky doubt that it's not an aggressive doubt like Jesus isn't real or the Bible isn't true or Jesus isn't resurrect, but it's a subtle doubt based on the goodness of God directed to the badness of us. Like, so how many of us, after years of walking with Jesus, still struggle to believe the gospel is as good as God says it is? How many of us, after years of walking with Jesus, still wrestle with the fact that there isn't anything you can do to make him love you more and anything you could do to make him love you less? Like that his grace won't run out, that he still wants us. I'm talking about a daily, subtle, too good to be true kind of doubt that affects all of us. And my friends in the room who haven't given your life to Jesus yet, I would propose maybe what's holding you back is believing the gospel actually is too good to be true. That it's so good, it's so pure, it's so free that there's no way it could be true. And I hope this morning you would see that it absolutely is. And so Citylight, I want you to know we need these verses. We need this passage. We need this story. And so we're going to look at two simple questions this morning. Number one, why does the gospel seem too good to be true? And number two, how does Jesus respond to our doubts, or what does he do with our doubts? So here's kind of the paradigm of the gospel, or the paradox of the gospel, is that the fact that the gospel seems too good to be true makes it the gospel. The fact that it seems so unbelievably, extravagantly generous makes it the gospel. And so first, why the gospel seems too good to be true. I want to reiterate, we're going to look at three reasons why it does. But again, verse 41, they still disbelieve for joy. So a couple reasons, but the first one we'll go to is the disciples that Jesus has are all Jews. So they know the sacrificial system and all the complications that come with that. They know the priest, they know the temple. They know all those complexities to their faith, all the laws. And they've been following Jesus for 3 years. And they know that if Jesus really is who he says he is, then all the whole priesthood now relies on one high priest, Jesus. That all the sacrifices now are done and there's one sacrifice, Jesus. That the temple is now like basically irrelevant and Jesus is the temple where the presence of God dwells. Like all this, right? And they're going, that is crazy to think of all those complexities simplifying into one man, Jesus, and our simple belief in him. And so the first reason that the gospel seems too good to be true is that it's too simple. Like just plain, it's just too uncomplicated. It's too simple. So friends, imagine you found out you had brain cancer. And after 5 years after for 5 years after your diagnosis, you have been doing everything in your power to get rid of that brain cancer. You go to the top specialists in the world. There's one in San Francisco, there's one in Hong Kong, and you go to another one in Dubai. They've done surgery, you've suffered through chemo and radiation over and over, and the cancer's still there. It's still growing. And so you try a more radical route. You go with some untested, cutting-edge cancer treatment options that haven't been approved yet. And they're risky, but it's your only option, so you try. But nothing works. You go to churches and you ask for extensive prayer. You do a TikTok and your story goes crazy viral on social media, and everyone's praying for you, and everyone's sending good vibes to you, and everyone's giving money on a big GoFundMe, and you're thinking, man, this is it. So you get tested again, and the cancer's still there, and it's even worse this time. And after 5 long suffering years, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on trying to get your cancer treated, seeing every renowned doctor, traveling the world's best hospitals, trying the most risky operations, getting so much prayer, you're left with even worse diagnosis. You're going to die soon, and there's nothing you can do about it. And as you're in the Starbucks drive-thru line, there's a homeless man with a cardboard sign that says, "I know how to cure cancer." And at first, you roll your eyes at his audacity of his claim. How dare he joke so lightly about something so serious? Who does he think he is? But as you're looking over to read his sign, the two of you lock eyes, and he starts to come over. And you're panicking, you don't know what to do. And he's standing right by the window, and you're debating on what to do. And so you roll it down to tell him, "Hey, I'm not interested." And he just subtly says, "Blink your eyes twice." And he walks away with a subtle smile. Blink my eyes twice? Is he insane? I've done everything. Blinking my eyes twice, that is so ridiculous. But at the same time, you're thinking, I've tried everything. I'm going to die. Why not do it? And so you blink your eyes twice really fast, and you feel that headache, that lingering, suffering headache that's been there for years evaporate. And you feel like you again. And you're trying to talk yourself down, but your heart's racing. And there's no way, right? But you hustle to the hospital and you ask, "Hey, can I get a CT scan?" And so you get the CT scan, and you're sitting in the doctor's office, and you hear hollering and shouting and screaming. And the doctor bursts through the door and goes, "It's a miracle. Your cancer's gone." And you guys celebrate, and you jump, and you leap, and you're shedding tears, and you just can't believe it. And he goes, listen, what treatment was it? Was it the one in Korea that they were testing out? And you go, I just blinked twice. This is the idea. This is what Jesus' claim of salvation by grace alone through faith alone means. The simplicity of Jesus saving sinners is borderline lunacy. I mean, it sounds crazy. It sounds like heresy. How could you ever apply such a simple solution to such an enormous, unsolvable problem? And to be clear, the gospel is simple for us to receive, but it was excruciatingly difficult for Jesus to provide for us, right? But remember back in Luke 18, where Jesus tells the story of the righteous Pharisee and the rebellious tax collector going to pray. And the Pharisee rolls out his robust resume in pride, while the tax collector simply beats his chest and says, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And Jesus says, yeah, that tax collector that beat his chest and said, "God, be merciful," that guy is getting saved. Wait, hold on, that doesn't make sense. Like, what did he do? It didn't mention how much he gave or what church he became a member at or how many mission trips he went on or Bible verses he memorized, just that he admitted he was a sinner and asked God to save him. Do you remember the story just recently in Luke 23 with the sinner on the cross, the criminal on the cross next to Jesus? After living a life of such brokenness that he's wound up on a cross to show the world what not to do, he looks over to Jesus and just says, "Remember me." And Jesus goes, "You'll be with me in paradise." Wait, hold on. It doesn't make sense. Like, he didn't get to prove himself. He never got to do anything radical for God. Exactly. Faith alone. Salvation is simple, and that simplicity makes it so difficult. We beg God for a checklist, don't we? Like, we would just love something tangible, something measurable to just assure that we helped with salvation, that we for sure have it. Something we can achieve, but God refuses to give us any of that. Why? Because if he did, it would rob the gospel of its glory, it would rob the cross of its scandal, and it would rob Jesus of his fully finished victory. It wouldn't be good news if there was anything we had to do with it. Ephesians 2:8 puts it this way: "For by grace you've been saved through faith." It's a gift. This isn't your own doing, it's a gift of God, right? The first reason the gospel seems too good to be true, frankly, is because it's too simple. It's too ordinary. It's too plain. It's got to be more complicated. Number 2, the second reason is that I'm too unworthy. The second reason the gospel is hard to believe is that I'm too unworthy. So it's one thing to wrestle with the too good to be true simplicity of the gospel. It's just faith alone, as simple as blinking twice. But it's a whole other thing to consider that simple saving faith allocated to sinners like you and me. See, these disciples, what are they doing? They're hiding away. They're fearing that what happened to Jesus could happen to them. They might be crucified too, guilty by association. And in the moment when Jesus needed them most, they all failed him. They all fled, right? They all forget what he had said. And so why are they disbelieving for joy? Why is it so hard for them to fathom that Jesus is right in front of them in this moment? Because they're completely unworthy of it. If Jesus were to show up to anyone in the world, it wouldn't be them. Like, think about this. Like, after all that he invested and poured into them, they completely blew it at the pinnacle moment that he needed them. They scatter in fear, and they're hiding still. That's a prime reason for Jesus to give up on them and go after more worthy people. If he were to show up to them, our assumption is not that he would come to bring peace, like it says, but that he would bring punishment, or he would scold them, or he would explain how disappointed he is in them. But what's Jesus doing? He's finding them in their unworthiness, fresh off of their failure, and they're all having a hard time believing it's real. And frankly, so do we. The most prestigious civilian or medal the civilian can receive in the United States is the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's given to people who have made, in quote, an especially meritorious contribution to the security or national interest of the United States, world peace, cultural, or other significant public or private endeavors. And I recently found out that when the president is placing the medal on you, at the same time, there's someone else in the room that's reading the list of accomplishments you've had through your life. It's reading through your achievements and what you've done. So when Bill and Melinda Gates received it, their long list of global advancements were read out loud for everyone to know as they're receiving this medal. So there are $36 billion given to relieve poverty and hunger and sickness. And I mean, it's incredibly special, right? It's a really sweet moment. And so, friends, I want you to picture the moment you stand before the throne of God at the end of your earthly life. And his majesty is shocking, right? Like you've surely fallen to your knees. Your face is to the ground. You're internalizing all of his gloriousness and all of his holiness. You're remembering your sin and your failure. It's a terrifying moment. And then an angel in the room goes and grabs a scroll and unrolls it and is about to read what you've done with your life. And but instead of mentioning anything you've done, the angel reads, absolutely spotless, unparalleled righteousness, infinitely loving, complete purity, honoring God in every second, rejecting evil always. You're there, face to the ground, quivering, and you slowly look up and you're shocked to see the God of the universe proudly smiling at you. In all of heaven, his voice booms, well done, good and faithful servant. And you get to enter into eternity, and everyone's cheering, and everyone's clapping, and everyone's excited, and all of your rebellion and all of your attempted righteousness had seemed to be forgotten, and all that mattered was that Jesus' resume was read over you, what he'd done in your place. How humbling is that? How hard is that to internalize? It seems too good to be true, right? Well, 2 Corinthians 5:21 says this, that God made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that we might become the righteousness of God. In other words, God made Jesus, the only worthy person, to become unworthy with our sin, so that unworthy sinners like you and me could be treated like a worthy saint. That's the gospel, the too good to be true gospel. So it's too simple and we're too unworthy. But lastly, the third reason it's too good to be true is because it's too inexhaustible. It's too limitless. It's too endless and infinite. So back in verse 41, when Luke says they are disbelieving for joy and marveling, it's the exact same word that described Peter's response to seeing the empty tomb in verse 12. So look up back at verse 12 in 24. It says, but Peter rose and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling for what had happened. So that word marveling is the same one that's used in verse 41, and it's communicating that same idea. It's a joy, it's a shock, it's an excitement, but it's not particularly belief. And so you got to remember the last interaction Jesus and Peter had. It was back a couple pages in Luke 22, after Peter denied Jesus 3 different times. They lock eyes after denial, and they see each other, and Peter weeps bitterly and leaves, right? So that's the last time that he's looked in the face of Jesus. And now he's standing looking at him eye to eye again. And what's got to be going through Peter's mind is Jesus is forgiving, right? Like we know he's forgiving, but the underlying question is how forgiving? Like after the 3 years of spending with him, Peter's been forgiven a lot. He's been shown a lot of grace, but the question is, I know he's forgiving, but how forgiving? Have I messed up too bad? Have I overextended his forgiveness? Has he run out of grace? Has the sea of his mercy dried up? Have I lost the love of Jesus because of what I've done? We ask those same questions too, don't we? Like those linger and float in our head often. We sit and think, I know I'm saved by grace, but what do I have to do to keep it? Like, is there anything I can do to lose it? There's got to be a limit, right, to his love, a point of exhaustion to his grace, a finite cap to his forgiveness. The claim that salvation is completely finished and inexhaustible makes it hard to believe and too good to be true. It's got to run out, right? What's the most like infinite thing here on earth, or the most expansive thing you can think of? It's probably the ocean, right? Like the biggest, most expansive, endless type of thing. It's probably the ocean, right? Well, I did some research, and there's about 352 quintillion gallons of water in the ocean. That's 352 followed by 18 zeros, okay? It's a decent amount, right? Now, the deepest part of the ocean is 35,000 feet straight down. That's 6.5 miles straight down. In 2022, with all our modern advancements, the most sturdy, remotely operated vehicle can only go down a third of the way because of the unbearable pressure, right? So, in fact, only 20% of the ocean has been mapped, explored, or even seen by humans. Actually, a greater percentage of the moon and Mars have been mapped than the ocean, than our ocean, okay? That's how big it is. It's unfathomable. It seems infinite, doesn't it? But it's not. In fact, a scientist named Paul Smith from Cardiff University did the research, worked out the math. If there are about 7.7 billion people here on Earth, and we all drink 2 liters of water a day, which is recommended, but we probably are a little bit parched on that one. If 7.7 billion, and we all drink 2 liters a day, that would be water for all of us for 89 trillion days. If we drink the ocean, okay? So, which is over 200 million years. That's long, right? That's a ridiculously long time. But I want to point out, it's got a limit. It will eventually run dry in 200 million years. And I think this is kind of how we view the grace of Jesus. Like, clearly it's expansive. Obviously it's big. It's basically inexhaustible. But if we're being honest, there are certain sins that I think that I could commit that wouldn't qualify under his grace. There are repeated sins that he's just worn out by and eventually will be done granting the same forgiveness to. There is an expectation for me to get better and stop sinning the same way or else. It may take an extreme amount, but most of us operate as if God's grace is an ocean that can eventually run dry because of our sin. It's almost infinite. It's pretty much inexhaustible. But hanging on the cross, Jesus cries out victoriously in John 19, verse 30, "It is finished." It's done. The work is done. Every drop of wrath that you and I deserve for past, present, future sin has been swallowed up by Jesus. The bill has been paid in full. The sin is gone. If you trust in Jesus, I want to tell you right now, there isn't a shred of possibility that could ever be held against you. That's the glorious nature of the gospel. Here's what Charles Spurgeon said about this. The moment a man believes in Christ, not some of his sins, but all his sins are gone. Just as when God blew with his wind, the Egyptians were all drowned at once in the waters of the Red Sea. Moses said, "You shall see them no more forever." So when we believe in Christ, the breath of God's pardoning love blows over the waters, and our sins sink into the bottom like a stone. There is not one of them left. The too good to be true gospel promises God's grace won't run out. And so Peter, fresh off of his failure, wrestled with this truth, and we get to rejoice that his grace is completely, definitively, gloriously, infinitely inexhaustible. See, the gospel seems too good to be true because it's too simple, we're too unworthy, and it's too inexhaustible. But the fact that the gospel seems too good to be true makes it the gospel. Like, that makes it actually real. The good news unlike any other news. And there's a long list of reasons why it seems too good to be true, and I would love to spend so much more time on it. But for time's sake, what we need to do is ask the question, well, in light of those, and our subtle doubts of disbelieving for joy, this too good to be true gospel, how does Jesus respond to it? What does he do with our doubts? Not helpful right there. Here's what he does. So the question becomes, how does he respond? How does Jesus respond to our preventative resistance to believe his grace is as good as he says he is? The disbelieving joy in the room that's holding us back to accepting him by faith. And how does Jesus respond to our reactive resistance of struggling to believe the gospel is as good as he says he is? The kind of disbelieving joy that paralyzes us as Christians to experience the fullness of the gospel in grace. So what does he do with our doubts? Look at verse 36. And as they were talking about these things, Jesus stood among them and said, "Peace to you." As they're talking about these things, Jesus himself stood in front of them and said to them, "Peace to you." First thing I want to point out is his relentless pursuit. Three things we'll look at really quick, but shortly, his relentless pursuit. They're hiding. He comes through the locked door directly somehow to them and says, "Peace to you." Now, this is crazy. Let's just process so far Jesus' day, if you haven't been with us the last couple weeks. So he resurrects early in the morning, and the women come, and they're surprised to find the tomb empty. The angels remind the women, hey, Jesus predicted his death and resurrection, and additionally, the whole Old Testament promised that would happen too. They're like, whoa, you're right. That's crazy. Awesome. Amazing. They jog over. They do a little quick half marathon over to the rest of the disciples. And they're talking. They're like, hey, you guys won't believe it. Jesus resurrected. Do you remember what he said? And the disciples are like, no, we don't. That's a made up story. We don't like that. Okay. And they're like, okay, you're crazy. And that was, a great example of why men should listen to women. But anyways, so that happens, and then Jesus is, we're like, where's Jesus? Well, he appears, Brett preached last week, on the road to Emmaus. There's two disciples. He hangs out with them. He's kind of hidden. It's kind of weird, but he's talking to them. He unpacks the whole Old Testament and it shows how it all points to him. Greatest Bible study in history, right? They're shocked by it. They freak out. They realize after time that it's actually Jesus that's been talking to them. They're like mind blown. Then they go back to the other disciples, and they're like, guys, you wouldn't believe it. Remember the girls? They were actually right. And the girls are like, yeah, I am, What are you going to say now? And this whole thing. And they're like, they're right. But then now in our scene, they're still debating on it. They're still wrestling through. Is this real? Did Jesus actually resurrect from the grave? And it's crazy because as they're hiding away behind locked doors, Jesus somehow shows up in the room. And they're shocked by it. But the first thing I want to point out is that Jesus responds to our doubt by relentlessly pursuing us. Like, you need to understand that. Like, they're hiding, and Jesus breaks in. Everyone forgets what he said. He said they're hiding in fear, and yet Jesus is in their midst. He shows up. In the midst of their faltering faith, Jesus persists. He won't stop until we realize that his too good to be true gospel is actually true. And so listen, for those of us in the room who struggle daily to believe that we are loved unconditionally, Jesus won't stop reminding you that he loves you. For those of us in the room who think he's distant, that's a struggle. I just feel like he's far from me. He won't stop showing you how near he is. For those of us in the room who think he has given up on us after doing what we promised we would never do again, he won't stop proving that he will hold you fast forever. How does Jesus respond to our doubt? First thing, relentlessly pursuing us. Second, look at verses 37 through 43. Story continues, but they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said to them, why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet? It's I myself. Touch me and see. For a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, have you anything here to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them. So not only do I want us to see his relentless pursuit, but I want us to see his gracious posture. In the midst of persistent doubt, Jesus relentlessly pursues them. But what's his posture? Like, what's his tone of voice? Like, what's kind of the feel? Like, how does he actually respond to their doubts? Can you think of a time you've been doubted? Like, think of a time you've been questioned or someone's been concerned. It could be a significant other thinking that you're unfaithful or questioning that. It could be a coach thinking you didn't put in a lot of work, or a manager or a friend questioning your loyalty. Like, can you think of a time that you've been doubted particularly? How did it make you feel? What were how did you respond when you were questioned? A couple options. Number one, really clear, is just frustration. Honestly, I'm just angry. When someone questions me, just don't like it, right? Number two, we can be confused. Like, why? What have I ever done to make you question my faithfulness or whatever, or my hard work or whatever it is. Number 3, I think we can just be argumentative or defensive. And we can just be like, oh, no, I want to prove you wrong. I want to prove myself right, prove you wrong. Or number 4, we can just be worn out in light of doubt and just like, I'm done. I'm done being questioned. I'm done being interrogated. I'm worn out. I'm done. Those are how we normally respond, but not Jesus. After all this doubt, resistance, hesitancy, after all of his proof to them, the whole day that we just looked at, and their continual pushback, what does Jesus do? He eats with them. He sits down at a table. And this is so significant, not necessarily for us, but for Jewish culture. This is massive. A meal to them meant proximity. It meant friendship and intimacy. And Jesus asking for a fish wasn't just to prove that he actually is a real bodily resurrected Jesus that can eat food, but it's also to communicate that he's actually with them, that he's actually here. You don't eat dinner with someone you hate. You scowl at them from across the room. You refuse to shake their hand. You don't look them in the eyes, right? You may sit at a conference table with someone you tolerate, but you sit at a table and eat with someone you love, people you care about. Jesus is so gracious in his posture. We need to know this. His question in verse 38 of why you trouble, why do doubts arise, that's not an angry, it doesn't communicate an angry, disappointed tone, but a gentle, caring invitation to actually believe in him, that it's him. And so when we doubt the goodness of God, I want you to know he doesn't shy away in frustration or confusion. He doesn't angrily defend himself, and he's not worn out and ready to walk away when we can't believe, we can't seem to get the fullness of the gospel. He's patient with you. He's enduring with you. As Bob Walls says, God's chest is big enough for you to beat on in the midst of those doubts. And the last thing I want to point out is his costly payment. So look again at verse 39. See my hands and my feet, that it's I myself, touch me and see, for a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Now it says they originally think Jesus is a ghost, okay? And in his effort to assure them it's actually him, he goes, hey, touch my hands and touch my feet. So clearly this is for them to see that he's not a ghost, right? That's significant. You can tangibly touch his body and you can feel the warmth of his skin and the bones underneath it and go, oh, yeah, it is a body. It's not a ghost that I can just, it's not Casper, right? But my question is, couldn't have he said, touch my face or feel my knees or look into my eyes? Like, why does he say, look at my hands and my feet? Because his hands and his feet were pierced so that he could be hung on a cross. These weren't just revealing his personhood, they were also revealing his payment for us, how much it cost for him to save them. But it also raises the question that I'm interested by is why did Jesus not heal his hands and his feet? Like in eternity, those who are crippled will leap for joy. Like there's this, like he could heal. Like why does Jesus choose to keep his wounded hands and feet? David Guzik is a commentator, a theologian. He says a couple options. Number 1, to be his ornaments, trophies of his great work for us, to memorialize the weapons with which he defeated death, to preserve the evidence of humanity's crime against him, and to serve as advocates in his perpetual intercession for us. It's amazing, right? Now, if you've ever seen a wounded veteran, wherever, if you've ever seen a wounded veteran, it serves as an unavoidable reminder of what they sacrificed for us. And it's humbling, isn't it? What they had to pay for our freedom. And from that room with Jesus and his disciples all the way through eternity, billions of years, Jesus wears his war scars for us. And so as the disbelieving disciples wrestle with the too good to be true gospel, Jesus shows them the holes in his hands and in his feet, and they remember the payment. Friends, if there was any other way for us to be saved, the cross would have been a cruel, cruel, disappointing thing. There was no other way to be saved. There was no other way. And yes, it's too simple because there was no other way for us to be saved. We complicated it. We couldn't do it, right? Yes, we're too unworthy, and that's the good news. Jesus came and sought us and chose us in that because nobody was worthy. And yes, it's inexhaustible because if it wasn't, we would lose it. Like this is the reality of the gospel, and Jesus reminds us, this is what I paid, this is who I am, this is what I've done. And so friends, as we leave, as we wrestle with this, would this just stir in our hearts to be mind blown by his grace, to really think the gospel is so it's like too good to be true, but it's actually true. To wrestle in that weird paradox and imbalance, to say this is crazy that I'm a recipient of this. And the people that we're getting baptized this morning, it's going to be amazing, and these are all pictures of this story. Every single one of them has been saved by simple faith, not by overcomplicated works. Every single one of them is unworthy of his grace, and yet the Father chose them before the foundation of the world. Every single one of them will seem to sin and exhaust the grace of God, but here's good news. It's inexhaustible and infinite, and he'll hold them forever. So let's pray and let's celebrate our friends.